They said Africa would fall. They drew lines on maps in London, Brussels, and Rome, carving a continent like bread at a dinner table, dividing land, people, and history between men who had never once touched African soil. By 1880, nearly the entire continent had been claimed, branded, and swallowed, kingdom by kingdom, chief by chief, tribe by tribe, nearly. Because in the highlands of East Africa, high above the fever swamps, above the colonial tide, sat an empire that had existed for 3,000 years. An empire that traced its bloodline directly to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. An empire whose warriors had fought with spear and fury for centuries. And when Europe finally came knocking, they left in body bags. This is the story of Ethiopia, of a throne soaked in gold and blood, of a king who shattered the myth of white invincibility on African soil, and of a man who rose from the shadows of that same throne, only to die alone on a mattress on the floor while his country starved. This is the story of the Lion of Judah. The year is 1889. The old emperor, Johannes IV, is dead, killed fighting Sudanese forces at the Battle of Metemma. His body barely cold, the vultures began circling. Nobles, warlords, regional kings. And then there was Menelik. Menelik II was king of Shewa, a southern kingdom within Ethiopia, and he was not supposed to be emperor. He was a rival, a challenger, a man the old guard had watched with suspicion for decades. But Menelik had done something no one else had thought to do. He had been buying guns. While the Ethiopian nobility traded in the old ways, cattle, land, loyalty, and ceremonial politics, Menelik had quietly been negotiating with European arms dealers, acquiring rifles, artillery, and ammunition in staggering quantities. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to be unassailable. When Johannes fell, Menelik moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had been ready for years. He declared himself Emperor of Ethiopia. Those who challenged him found themselves looking down the barrel of a very modern problem. But the real test was coming, and it would arrive wearing Italian boots. In the same year Menelik took the throne, Italy presented him with the Treaty of Wuchale, a diplomatic agreement between Ethiopia and the Kingdom of Italy. On the surface, it looked like a friendly arrangement. Recognition, trade, mutual respect. There was just one problem. The Amharic version of the treaty said Ethiopia could use Italy as a diplomatic intermediary if it wished. Optional, voluntary, a courtesy. The Italian version said Ethiopia must conduct all foreign affairs through Italy. One word, one verb. And suddenly, Ethiopia was an Italian protectorate on paper. The Italians announced it to Europe. The Berlin conference crowd nodded along approvingly. Italy had claimed Ethiopia without firing a single shot. Except Menelik had read both versions. He rejected the treaty. He wrote letters to every European monarch he could reach. He told them plainly, Ethiopia is not for sale. Ethiopia bows to no man. The Europeans smiled politely and ignored him. So Menelik began preparing for war. March 1st, 1896, the Battle of Adwa. The Italian colonial army, 17,000 soldiers with artillery, cavalry, and the full technological backing of a European power, marched into the Ethiopian highlands expecting to crush a primitive resistance force and established dominance within days. What they found was 100,000 Ethiopian soldiers. Menelik had mobilized an army unlike anything Africa had ever seen. Not just warriors, but a coordinated military force. His empress, Menelik II, had ridden to the front herself, commanding troops, managing logistics, and rallying fighters with a ferocity that made men ashamed to be afraid. The battle lasted a single day. The Italian army was annihilated. Generals were captured. Flags were seized. Approximately 7,000 Italian soldiers were killed. One of the worst defeats a European colonial force had ever suffered on African soil. The shockwaves hit Europe like a thunderclap. For the first time in the colonial era, Africa had not just resisted, it had won. Decisively, publicly, humiliatingly. Italy was forced to sign the Treaty of Addis Ababa, recognizing Ethiopia's full and unconditional sovereignty. The Lion of Judah had roared, and Europe had flinched. While Menelik reigned, presiding over a court filled with ceremony, conspiracy, and power, a young man was watching. His name was Lige Tafari Makonnen. Born in 1892, the son of Ras Makonnen, one of Menelik's most trusted generals and governors. Tafari was brilliant from the start. He read voraciously, he spoke French, he understood diplomacy the way other boys understood games. While the court played politics with blunt instruments, Tafari played it like chess. When Menelik began suffering strokes in his final years, the palace descended into chaos. Empress Zewditu, Menelik's daughter, was installed as sovereign, but she needed a regent, someone capable, someone controllable. They chose Tafari. They were wrong about the second part. As regent, Tafari moved carefully but always forward. He modernized. He abolished the slave trade, a move that was both morally significant and strategically brilliant, as it won him goodwill in Europe and America. He lobbied for Ethiopia's admission into the League of Nations in 1923, making Ethiopia one of the only African nations to hold a seat at the international table. He traveled to Europe. He met kings. He was received with the kind of deference usually reserved for heads of state, because he carried himself like one. Back home, Empress Zewditu watched him with growing unease. The regent had become more powerful than the throne. Plots were hatched. Rivals rose and fell. The palace smelled of conspiracy and incense in equal measure. In 1930, Empress Zewditu died, under circumstances that remain to this day historically suspicious. 3 days after her death, Ras Tafari Makonnen was crowned Emperor of Ethiopia. He took the throne name Haile Selassie I, Power of the Trinity, Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, King of Kings, Elect of God. The boy who had watched from the shadows had taken the throne. For 5 years, Haile Selassie worked to modernize Ethiopia, writing a constitution, building schools, reforming the military. He walked a tightrope between tradition and progress, between the church and the state, between feudal nobles who wanted nothing to change and a world moving rapidly forward. Then, Mussolini invaded, October 1935. Italian forces, armed with poison gas and modern aircraft, swept across Ethiopia's borders. The world watched. The League of Nations, the very institution Selassie had championed, deliberated, condemned, and did nothing meaningful to stop it. Selassie made one of history's most unforgettable speeches at the League of Nations in Geneva. Standing before the international body, he looked out at the assembled representatives of the world and delivered a warning so prophetic it still echoes. It is us today. It will be you tomorrow. The delegates listened. They applauded even. And then they went home and did nothing. Ethiopia fell. Selassie fled into exile in Britain, where he would spend 5 years, watching his country occupied, his people gassed, and his throne sat in by Italian generals. He was not broken. He was waiting. When World War II shifted the tide, when Britain found itself at war with Italy, Selassie saw his moment. He coordinated with British forces and Ethiopian resistance fighters. In 1941, he re-entered Ethiopia on horseback, at the head of a liberation force. 5 years after fleeing, the emperor walked back into Addis Ababa. The crowds went berserk. For many Ethiopians and across the African diaspora, particularly in Jamaica, where the Rastafari movement had formed around his divinity, his return was nothing less than the fulfillment of prophecy, the returned Messiah, the conquering lion. But crowns cast long shadows. For the next 3 decades, Haile Selassie ruled with an iron grip. He was sophisticated on the world stage, a founding member of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, a respected global statesman, the face of African independence. But at home, Ethiopia remained feudal. Land was controlled by the aristocracy and the church. Famine moved through the countryside like a slow tide, not dramatic enough to make headlines, but devastating enough to hollow out entire regions. Selassie's government was aware. Reports were written, they were buried. The emperor, who had modernized his nation on paper, had failed to modernize the ground beneath his people's feet. Then came 1973. A famine struck northern Ethiopia, catastrophic, undeniable, killing hundreds of thousands. And while peasants died, the imperial court continued its banquets, its ceremonies, its lion-feeding rituals at the palace. A British journalist named Jonathan Dimbleby made a documentary. He spliced footage of the famine together with footage of Selassie's court. The hunger and the opulence cut together like a crime scene. The film was called The Hidden Hunger. It aired in Ethiopia. The country erupted. From within the military, a committee of low-ranking officers, calling themselves the Derg, meaning committee in Amharic, began organizing. They were not idealists, they were not Democrats, they were soldiers who had watched their men die of famine while the palace threw parties, and they had made a decision. One by one, they arrested members of the imperial cabinet, ministers, generals, nobles, each one taken quietly in the night. Then they came for the emperor. September 12th, 1974. Haile Selassie, 82 years old, the conquering lion of Judah, emperor of 3,000 years of lineage, was led out of his palace and placed into a Volkswagen Beetle. The symbolism was deliberate, humiliating, surgical. He was taken to a military barracks. The Derg announced his deposition on state radio, calling him a feudal despot who had betrayed the Ethiopian people. What followed is disputed, obscured, and deliberately shrouded. The official story, given years later, was that Haile Selassie died on August 27, 1975, from complications following a prostate operation. What investigators later found told a different story. His body, when it was eventually exhumed decades later, was discovered buried beneath the concrete floor of a palace latrine. Forensic examinations suggested he had been smothered, suffocated, likely in the night, by agents of the Derg, the man who had survived Italian poison gas, exile, revolution, 5 years of waiting in cold British rooms, the man who had addressed the League of Nations and prophesied the Second World War, the man whom millions considered divine, the returned Messiah, the elect of God. He died on a mattress on the floor of a cell, alone. They buried Haile Selassie in secret. For years, the Derg denied he was dead. Then they denied they had killed him. Then they denied the burial site. But history is not so easily buried. The Ethiopian Empire, born from the union of Solomon and Sheba in myth, forged in Menelik's rifles at Adwa, preserved through famine and fascism, had ended not in the thunder of war, but in the quiet of a concrete floor. Yet the story refused to die. Across the Caribbean, Selassie's name became sacred. His face on murals, his words in songs, his legacy woven into a global movement that outlasted him by decades and counting. In Ethiopia itself, he was reburied in 2000 at Holy Trinity Cathedral in Addis Ababa. A state funeral finally, a generation too late. The Lion of Judah was gone, but the roar, even now, still carries. Throughout history, it has been the inaction of those who could have acted, the indifference of those who should have known better, the silence of the voice of justice when it mattered most, that has made it possible for evil to triumph.